Hello and welcome to Cymatics and the Mysticism of Sound. Thank you for the introduction. So, Cymatics is usually defined as the study of visualization of sound. I personally like to go for a slightly broader definition. For me, it's also an art form, since I'll be essentially drawing using sound, or sculpting, one could say, and in some ways it's also a way of witnessing how nature itself draws and sculpts with waveform and vibratory phenomena. I like to weave mysticism in there because, first of all, it's a great passion of mine, and it allows to answer questions almost more than it, or ask questions almost more than it answers answers. So we can really go into some quite interesting and lofty investigations and theories and stories even. So to start off on that note, in various spiritual, religious, and mystical scriptures and traditions, there are hints at sound, waveform, and vibration being an almost primordial phenomena. For the Hindus and the Buddhists, it's the primal and first sound, which for them is the Om. In Hermeticism, we have a similar cosmology where a mysterious celestial goose does a great honk, and from it the world is thus born. And in the Bible, they say in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word is to be understood as the logos in Greek, or the vibration, or the vibe. What I find particularly fascinating with cymatics is that for me it really is an insight, an open window or an open door onto these invisible processes that regiment and order, I would say, all of life. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Since I assume you're all, or most of you, are students in sound art or sound, I think it might be quite interesting to go into the technicalities of it. Though I say technicalities, this is all very lo-fi, sort of deceptively so. Once we get going, hopefully it's all quite impressive, but the actual kit or equipment behind it is deceptively simple. There's some pots and pans, there's some everyday mediums that we're going to be watching in order to see how wave forms. So we mentioned a Chladni plate named Chladni after Ernest Chladni, who was I would say possibly the first, or at least the person who pioneered that particular type of cymatics. And I'm going to be using salt on a metal plate. I've got a tray of water, and I've got a lid from a jam jar, I believe, that I'm going to use to hold a bowl. So all really sort of everyday stuff. And then as far as the audio equipment, the secret to all my powers is transducer speakers. So now you know transducers have the particularity that they resonate whatever they come into contact with. For cymatics, it's ideal. When I started doing cymatics about 10 or 12 years ago, the official instruction back then was rewiring voice coil drivers. It was all a bit much for me, and I was determined to find something much simpler, and transducers ended up being the answer. Ever since, I've used them extensively throughout different works and different apparatus, but for cymatics it's fantastic, and I've done this stuff as sort of party tricks on the go, as if transducers just work in outdoors, with wind, in all sorts of different scenarios. Then there's a basic mixer. It does have the particularity that I can isolate the output, so I can control the the different setups independently. That's just quite nifty for these types of demonstrations, but again, there's really nothing fancy going on here. The vocals are plugged into the. I'm going to be using a tone generator and a multi-tone generator. Sine waves is my preferred choice, but it doesn't have to be. It works with different waveforms, and we can also stimulate the different mediums and different setups using the microphone. I will at one point encourage people to come over, because as much as the live feed is nice to get this sort of overall demo going, I think it benefits from being seen in person. It really sort of can do something to us, as if we're witnessing something quite profound, and then on a more sort of logistical and practical note, and sometimes depending on the vantage point, the patterns can look different. So it benefits from actually seeing in person. So at some point, I'll invite you around, and you can even try and stimulate the mediums with the voice, which can be quite fun. So what can we say about cymatics? Probably not going to talk for too long, because since we're talking about sound and visualization of sound, I think the most important bit is to actually just get on with visualizing sound rather than listening to me ramble for too long. But there's a few interesting ideas which I'd like to possibly introduce, and then I'll leave it with you. When we're going to do the Chladni plate in particular, there's actually we might as well start doing the demo while I talk, because that way I will have the benefit of being backed by the actual patterns rather than the theory of the patterns. I think we can all see. Salt, plate, and then we will, not that frequency. Okay, so frequency equals pattern, and there's a lot to be said for that, and when I change the frequency, it changes the pattern. That's the essence of it. What's quite the implication I want to make with cymatics, again, we're looking at it's a way of making the invisible visible. So it's a way of making invisible vibratory phenomena apparent to us. For me, what's particularly interesting is the notion, albeit speculative, that all form, all shape, all pattern is sung into existence, or sung into form by, for the most part, inaudible sound vibrations or inaudible vibratory phenomena. And once you stare at cymatics for long enough, you no longer see the shapes of nature or the shapes of everyday life as being arbitrary. For example, we've just stopped at this. This happens to be 558 Hertz. That shape reminds me a little bit of a mouth or lips, and there's just something about those natural curves that reminds me of the natural curves that we find in nature. It could be a face, it could be a tree, it could be a flower, it could be sea creatures. Different frequencies, different patterns. Now, to give you a little bit on the technicality of it, and it's slightly different with different mediums, but what we're seeing here isn't necessarily the shape of that frequency. It's the shape of that frequency going through this plate in particular. So the sound goes through the plate, And when I hit one of the harmonics of the plate, so every object has a resonant frequency and a set of harmonics. The classic example is you take a wine glass, you ping it, that's its resonant frequency, and if I were to feed it back to it, I can really shake its molecular structure from the inside and even shatter a wine glass. So anytime I hit one of the harmonics of the plate, we get a nice pattern that forms. The higher the frequency, the more intricate the pattern. If Chladni plates really like higher frequencies, so apologies in advance for when we do get to the slightly more abrasive ones, but it's worth it as far as the patterns go. And this is where we start getting some nice natural geometries and natural symmetries. I'll pause it on this pattern for a second and then we'll go back for some more. There's an interesting idea which is derived from my studies, investigations and experiments with Cymatics. Obviously we're seeing what's initially a bunch of messy grains of salt on a plate that almost miraculously seem to order themselves into straight lines, into conduits, into fluxes, and technically they're called nodal points and antinodes. When the waveform goes through the plate, the salt congregates in the nodes or the antinodes, correct me if I'm wrong, one or the other. I believe it's the nodes, and the antinodes would be the what remains like the black points. An interesting idea, and I thought of this when we were going upstairs to collect equipment in a busy university environment with a lot of people going in all sorts of directions, and there's a certain order that inevitably forms, and you get the same thing obviously in urbanism with the flux of transit, with the flux of traffic, and with just the general flow of life. In sound physics, as you may know, there's a physics principle called sympathetic vibration, which in essence I play the A note on a piano, and if there's a guitar hanging on the wall, the A note of the guitar is going to start vibrating even at a distance. That's the basis of sympathetic resonance, and it is important, and engineers have to take that into account when they design buildings or bridges. Should the sound of the wind or the steps of people marching happen to hit the resonant frequency of the bridge, it would do the same thing as the wine glass, and this does actually happen, and they got it wrong in London. Even when they launched the Millennium Bridge, it turns out the sides of the bridge resonated at 1 hertz, and the day they launched it, everyone's other step happened to hit 1 hertz, and the whole bridge started rattling. It cost them millions to fix the mistake. So it's a physics principle that is taken into account. Where I like to open sympathetic vibration to something that's a bit more speculative is the idea that there's an underlying vibrational language that precedes verbal language, and there are some interesting cues in everyday linguistics that might hint at what I'm getting at. For example, to be on the same wavelength as someone. For me, we're vibrational beings. We generate, we have a vibe, if you want, which is the compendium of our body language, of our attitudes, of our thoughts, of our beliefs, the whole shebang. Our vibe is constantly interacting with the world around us, including other people's vibes, but also including places, including circumstances, including events. There is an underlying vibratory language that is far more efficient than than linguistics, and it means that someone leaves the house feeling aggressive. They will very much likely have the opportunity to encounter someone or something or an event or a circumstance that resonates with that feeling. Or likewise, someone leaves the house, and I'm sure we've all experienced this in some shape or form, feeling perfectly jovial and happy, and it just seems that miraculously the world is smiling at us that day. There is an interaction of vibrations that is at work and at play constantly and all the time. So for me personally, at least speculatively, sympathy goes a whole lot further than bridges and wine glasses. If we keep going. I often get asked why salt in particular, and if it would work with other mediums. For me, cymatics is a study. It's an art form. It's a type of mysticism, and it's an experimentation. So I always welcome different experiments. I've tried different powders, different mediums. I have settled on salt. For one, it has the right consistency, it's just about the right density. Then there's the obvious reason that on a black plate the contrast looks nice, but there's nothing to say that it has to be salt, there's nothing to say that it has to be sugar. Different powders, I've tried anything from iron filings to coffee grounds to anything and everything. Salt also happens to have a nice parallel with alchemy, of which I'm very passionate, and alchemy has 3 different principles. Mercury would be the equivalent to spirit, and Mercury is the passive principle, so it's a recipient. Water, for example, is a type of Mercury. You put a tea bag or a mint leaf in water, and the water absorbs it. It takes on the information. So in some ways, I do have a setup that at least offers a sort of wink or nod to alchemy. Salt in alchemy is the principle that you might describe as the body, the corporality of things. And then in alchemy they have the 3rd principle is sulfur. They love using cryptic words that mean other things at other times, but sulfur is the mind or psyche. It's the movement itself. Interestingly enough, when we end up moving on to bubble cymatics, and you probably won't notice it at first, it took me a long time to actually make the connection. What's really interesting working with bubbles is that suddenly we're no longer on a 2-dimensional plane. We have depth and spherical depth at that. With a bit of practice or repetition, I've ended up noticing and realizing that I'm seeing similar patterns. This is, I I see this one in bubbles a lot, but this is a flattened version of it. And we're also going to end up talking about toruses and toroidal fields, because I can't help but talk about toruses and toroidal fields. Nice wavy curves, and we'll keep on going. We're at about 1,500 hertz right here. Which is where the frequencies become a little bit less pleasant, but let's see if we can get some interesting results. This is another one that pops up in the bubbles. Still quite satisfying on a 2D plane. And I think you only really get this with transducers, but if I get the mix of the amplitude, the frequency, and other things right, the antinodes also start to participate. Almost looks like shading. Yeah, I think we can see it on the screen. There's these kind of areas, but it's quite a subtle gradient to it. Stop on that for now and try a different medium. See how it behaves. Yo. Check. What? Hello.
Never mind, sorry.
Hallelujah. Shall I try and do a better job with this one?
I just can't hear you over the sine tones.
I know I can turn it up. Hello. Hey. We can somewhat see it on the screen. I think this is where it sort of possibly benefits them. From coming to see in person, but I'll do a little bit of water on the live feed. We'll do a little bit of bubbles on the live feed, and then I think that'll be a good time to invite you to come and join me up here, because viewed from above, it's a whole other universe. It's a very different type of pattern than the Chladni plates, almost a bit cellular at times, especially if you really get in close. What's interesting with the water is it's very forgiving compared to the Chladni plates and salt patterns. As we said earlier, salt patterns form when you hit one of the harmonics of the plate. Water doesn't really care. It's always responsive, more or less. Sometimes, obviously, when you do hit the resonance of the plate, it can jump out at you. But it's very responsive, so it works well with. You can feed it music and watch how your favorite song behaves. But I'll try and give it some. Reverb. I think it's time for some bubbles. Now, if all goes well, first of all, I won't make a complete embarrassment of myself trying to make a bubble, so I might get that out of the way now. These bubbles last a surprising amount of time. They stay propped up. There's the nib. Oh, there it is. One was already showing traces of not wanting to stay propped up. I'm very at one with my bubbles, and I know their lifespan in advance. About 25 seconds left, and. I guess I didn't account for the fact that the mic is going to be in the bubbles. Doesn't matter. So part of what helps prop the bubble up is actually a standing wave. So the sound comes out through the transducer into the lid, hits the membrane, and then bounces back down. So you get a bit of a sort of ladder formation, which does actually help me. I promised I would talk about one of my favourite topics, and I think after that I'll invite you to come and gather around if you please. Toruses and toroidal formations. Some of you may have heard about this already, though it remains fairly obscure for whatever reasons, though they are studied and observed throughout science, namely the magnetic fields of planets or solar systems. A toroidal formation is a geometry that is self-perpetuating and self-sustaining, so it's the geometry of feedback. They look like very nice donuts, and you may have seen animations online or in other places. There's a sort of vortex that goes outward, over, wraps around, and then comes back underneath, and the whole thing spins gloriously. Once you get used to observing toruses and toroidal formations, they carry their echoes throughout nature. If you open an apple, it looks like a torus. If you open a pepper, it looks like a torus. They're literally everywhere, and you can actually calc pretty much all form of a toroidal form. The reason I bring up toruses at this point is because if all goes well, or when all goes well, you can actually see toruses in bubble cymatics. Sometimes you need to know what you're looking for, or sometimes you just get the conditions right, and there's one that's there loud and clear. So I think on that note, if you do want to come and see a little bit up close, now might be a good time, and we'll get the other things going again so that you can compare how it looks on the screen from in situ. Within reason, feel free to move around. And yes, by all means, get your cameras out. much enjoy working with multi-tones at once. Not only do you benefit from potential harmonics, overtones, overlays, but you can create beats. Obviously we're hearing a pulsation right now, which I think is because we're not quite on the octave, but we're a bit off, we're offset, and that creates that movement, which also helps the cymatics dance about a bit. And I think our bubble has probably got about 20 seconds left. Since I all have you now, there's an interesting thing that happens with the bubbles that I haven't quite been able to explain. It goes through, it has a cycle of life, so I blow the bubble, it starts nice and clear, we watch the cymatics do their thing, then usually there's a psychedelic swirl, which is not uncommon for bubble solution, but it becomes very prominent, colors and things like that. And then there's a something which I can't quite explain. There's black residue or scories that starts to appear around, almost as if there was potentially a filtration process going on, but I just don't know what the black bits correspond to, and that usually marks the end of the life cycle, which is why I can just about estimate or guess when it's going to pop. Different size bubble is going to have different patterns, so let's play around and see if we can find something. Don't ask me why, but 150 Hertz roughly, let's say between 130 and 170 happens to be the sweet spot for bubble cymatics. Interesting things going on here. consider that the symbol of perfection, or sun, or gold in alchemy. Pass it around.
Does it have to be a low?
No, that'll respond nicely for. You see, beautiful, very nice. Nice.
So we like to
So the om frequency, what's that then? What would that be?
I mean, I don't think there is an
Into the
om
mic.
frequency per se. I think the om as it's described in mythology is the compendium of all frequencies.
Right.
Then if I did an om, I would arbitrarily pick a tonality with which to do it. But interestingly enougwhen on the topic of om, when you do oms, and I think in sound healing they call this chakra intonation, you can clearly hear how different vowels, different sounds, even if you pick the same pitch, work different areas of the body. So the O sounds are clearly lower and they're felt in the gut and they originate in the gut. The E sounds are much higher up. R sound is a middle center heart based sound, which has all sorts of interesting implications. In Hermeticism, they have something called, curiously enough or funnily enough, the language of the birds, which is it's a way of hearing language for its resonant properties, and you essentially omit the spelling of it of language, and they use that to play around with language, to use it as a coded language to facilitate transmission of esoteric knowledge and secrets, but it has a double implication that language isn't just arbitrarily decided. The sounds would have a meaning prior to that, and the older the language, the more it's apparent. For example, in Sanskrit, they have many different words for love, and the sonority of ah is going to be very prevalent. Since ah is a heart-based sound, perhaps when an infant child starts uttering sounds like mama or papa or dada, it's not by chance, and so words have an underlying resonance and construction that will carry through all the way through different languages. English is a very modern language. That's a hybrid of many other languages. But let's do an Om. Want to try the microphone? You've now got the added benefit of reverb to make you sound really awesome. Reverb. Thank you. It's up to me to show off, so I embarrass myself. Any requests? I feel like we have. I feel like we haven't quite done enough bubbles. How are we for time with Q&As and all that? Good?
Yeah, we're good. We've got an hour total left. So.
Yikes. Just gonna have to serenade you some more. In that case, definitely some more bubbles.
was just wondering what would happen if you add something more dense into the water. Because like the fluid maybe doesn't.
Yeah, it's a very good question. For having tried different mixes, sometimes it's a bit underwhelming. I mean, for example, you know, a classic one is you put oil in water and they don't mix. But cymatically speaking, it doesn't generate additional patterns. Occasionally you might stumble on something interesting. For the most part, a lot of experiments I find when you start mixing different physics principles like magnetism, like ferrofluid. It took me a while to get ferrofluid to react cymatically because it was either the cymatics or the magnetism would take over. Eventually I found a way to get ferrofluid to dance cymatically. I don't fully have the answer. I think there's still a world of experiments that are possible with different densities, different fluids, how they mix, testing to see if they do respond. I've done occasionally some experiments and experiences. I'm not sure if it's out of laziness, but I tend to stick with the stuff that works. Or I just keep looking for something that really works, and then I stick with that, like the bubbles. So there's still a lot of potential. I mean, it could be anything. You know, using milk would be different. Another classic cymatic material is cornstarch, and that's considered a non-Newtonian fluid because it sort of looks like it defies gravity, even though it doesn't. And that's interesting. You do get it's much more viscous. So even if you're not doing there's a version where you can really get it to sort of stand up. It almost looks like little people forming, like lemmings or something like that. But even using cornstarch as a sort of water substitute is quite interesting. It's very I mean, you can see grids and things like that here, but it's different types of grids. That bottle's going to pop. So there's the. So we can all witness the saw some blackness. Ooh. Sit.
So with the molecular level, so with water, hydrogen, H2O, does that make a difference? Has there been much research on the molecular structure of it?
Well, it would technically. You know, would it make much of a difference to the naked eye? It depends. Yeah, it depends. I think if you started using something that clearly has a different density and consistency, for example, you know, the first one would be in olive oil or Mazola or whatever. Yes, it would look substantially different. Then paint would look different. You know, the thicker materials, it would also behave differently. So you'd need to work the amplitude, i.e. the volume, a little bit differently. Okay, I think we'll have a last blast of the demo using my all-time favorite frequency, 33 Hertz. And is it? Yeah. Is it C if you're tuned to 432 Hertz, possibly?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Calculate it without too much difficulty, but I'm a bit overwhelmed right now. cheating a bit. I'm using I'm backing it up with 66 hertz, 1 octave up. I do like cheating a bit. It's a mercurial thing. And are we going to see a Taurus for our last? Ooh. Don't know about Taurus, but that's interesting. It's got that kind of flipping in and out effect, especially at certain angles. So as far as what I was saying earlier, you can see the psychedelic effect. It's then going to be followed by the blackness is starting to creep in. If anyone has any theories as to why this happens, please do share.
Is any bubble experts amongst you?
Transducers.
You look like you have an idea though.
Have you had to experiment much with the bubble formula? Like, have you ever DIY'd some fairy liquid? How's that gone?
I have.
Yeah, like a speaker is that.
I mean, the stuff I'm using is actually the shop bought solution, because I found it. It's hard to tell, and then when you have a doubt, you know, I end up sticking with the tried and tested one, because it's like, is mine not as good?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, okay. Yes, because you were doing that. You were basically doing strings and guidance cymatics. Yeah. Oh, God, yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Sammy again. The question is, the coil on the coloured rim, is that caused by the reflection of the underneath the rim, as opposed to the bubble itself?
The colours.
The electrical coil, like metal coil, is that a reflection of the rim, as opposed to
I think so. I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, I do have a flashlight in my case. If you use a non-circular light, you get a very different effect. Obviously, a lot of the sort of the magic of those particular patterns is because it's a circular light and a circular refraction that's being subjected to vibrations and waveforms, but it's quite interesting doing just a singular beam. It gives a type of basic Lissajous patterns. If everyone knows what that is, and it's I guess another type of cymatics. It can be done with pendulums, but it can be done with lights and mirrors and lasers and things like that. It's the same thing. This is I guess technically you might say it's a derivative of Lissajous patterns, but where I think it's Antoine Lissajous did some quite excellent work is that he was looking at harmonics and ratios and how they behave, namely visually. So instead of doing a single frequency, you would give 2 frequencies and you would see how they behave. And obviously when they're harmonically related, which is the same thing as mathematically related, their appearance is harmonically related. So you get these wonderful shapes and curves, and not unlike what we're seeing with the bubble. Though I also quite like the sort of more chaotic ones that we're looking at. And then you'll find you'll find those patterns as the basis for what they called in antiquity the music of the spheres, which is the harmonic relations between the celestial movements, and if you do see diagrams of planetary revolutions, they're absolutely beautiful types of geometries. They're very often toroidal types of geometries, and they're not unlike some of the stuff that we're looking at.
Right, I think this is our last bubble. And that's Cymatics.
Up close and personal. Thank you.
Okay. Should we move on to the Q&A? I'll take this.
Ah.
Okay, so thanks, Mark. Yeah, so we're going to open it up for Q&A now. I appreciate there was a bit of one there, but yeah, just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic over. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh. Can I answer with reverb?
Yeah, sure.
Hi.
Hi.
I've got a question about the scale of the material you're using, mostly about the water. I saw you only have a little water. Is that necessary for the geometries to appear, or can you have more water?
Yeah, it's a good question. Do tell me if the reverb gets annoying, but hopefully it gives me a mystical authority. It's a good question. Somehow I hadn't actually answered that question until a demo and talk, not unlike this one, maybe about a year ago, and I was working with a really big train, and they all really wanted to know, so they started going to the bathroom to fill up cups of water and see if they could get to the point where either the patterns would change or it would stop patterning. And in the end, the amount of water or depth of water had very little incidence on the patterns. Maybe you have to work the trace slightly more volume-wise or amplitude-wise, but that's about it. You get the patterns seem to be dependent on the frequency, not on the volume of water. And as far as the efficiency of the patterns appearing in water, the volume of water has, as far as I could tell, very little incidence.
Nice, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so have you worked with bigger plates of water, like huge ones?
Yes, I mean that's actually my preferred choice. In my studio, I have the plate I like to work with is about a third of this table. It's just nicer to work with a big surface area. Also, I can get it to where I avoid that sort of balancing act that we're doing on a smaller scale. And since that one conference in particular was in my neighborhood, I bought the big tray along. Interestingly enough, and I think it relates to your question, the size of the tray doesn't particularly need a different treatment, and I've tried massive Chladni plates, and I've tried massive plates of water. There's something about how vibration travels through a medium. It just, when it goes off, it's off, and it goes through the entire tray, and it comes back to its center. And so a really big tray doesn't particularly need multiple transducers. It doesn't particularly need much more amplitude. It doesn't particularly need a different treatment as a small tray.
Amazing, thank you.
Thank you for the lecture. You mentioned at the beginning how invisible vibrational cues shape the world around us and our human experience, specifically about how if we walk out the house angry, we might experience an angry encounter. But would you be able to talk more about that, and also where I might be able to read about it? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. In some ways, it's I could tie it back to an equator, especially if you're looking for different source materials, to what somewhat recently ended up being called different names, namely the law of attraction. The law of attraction is defined in different ways by different people, but I'll give you my definition, at least my definition of today. It's your vibe attracts vibe, like attracts like. What you're brewing, if you want, what you're vibrating, your states of being, your attitudes, your disposition, your beliefs, your emotional baggage, all of this sort of transparent stuff is gravitating quite naturally towards similar wavelengths, similar vibrations, and that could be other attitudes, it could be circumstances, it could be events, it could be things. Back when the law of attraction had its sort of peak of popularity, and I think it came through a very sort of American New Age school. It was all about attracting stuff. So it's how do I get my new bicycle, or how do I get the new job? And in essence, regardless of what it is we're trying to attract, the answer would be you put yourself in the favorable disposition, which is the vibe, the attitude. One puts oneself in the vibratory disposition, so the attitude of already having the bicycle or already having the dream job, and in that resonance, in that vibe, in that attitude, sure enough, a circumstance, and it might feel coincidental at first, will inevitably appear if it's sustained enough, and if it's genuine and sincere enough. So that's one area where you could look into it via the law of attraction. Then you go into all these sort of spiritual schools, anything from the more new agey to the Other traditions had their variations on it, using different terminologies.
How has this been backed with physics or ties with sound art? The law of attraction specifically.
In physics, the closest thing I can find is sympathetic vibration, as I described earlier, which is two vibrational bodies attuned to the same frequency will resonate at a distance, and that is a physics principle. Then things like the law of attraction is non-empirically demonstrated, so I can't particularly cite scientific sources or resources for it. But as far as sound art, I think we've been demoing some things that somewhat relate to it, but there's an interesting notion, and it's one that's very often omitted, namely in law of attraction and when talking about vibratory phenomena, is that vibration has, and you can see it in the basic representation of a sine wave, it has peaks and troughs. In ancient spirituality, namely Taoism, they very much understood the dual nature of or relative nature of the world, and they symbolized it beautifully with the yin and yang, both as a symbol and a philosophy. And so there's an interesting idea. We're talking about being on the same wavelength, like attracts like, but the bit that everyone forgets is that every vibration has its underside, every vibration has its flip side. So the tricky part is that simultaneously you're summoning the yin bit, which might be the more desirable outcome, but you're summoning the other side, because everything comes with its flip side. Takes a little bit of mental gymnastic. I think we lost that in our modern world, where we really love to, we have a much more Manichaean understanding of things. We love to see things as one thing or the other. We love to identify as only half and reject the other half. But for me, both sides are integral, and that's very much part of everything we're talking about. I generally don't work that into the point when I sort of address it superficially, because it makes a nicer point if I just say to be on the same wavelength, like attracts like.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh, is there any chance we could get that sort of
Thank you.
That's better.
Thank you for asking that.
Thank you very much for the demonstration. Really fascinating to see your work. You've talked about doing demos with it. Do you actually do performances with it? And how does that manifest? What do you do?
Yeah, I used to perform it. I called it Cymatics, and you had some hints of it. It's sort of because I used to. I still make music. I used to perform music extensively, and I was quite keen to ally both of them. I was working a lot with drones and with voice, and since I'm able to manipulate the different trays independently, I would essentially perform a set, and so you would have a bed of drone that I wouldn't be sending to the plate, but I'd be sending that to the PA, and then I could weave over and sing over or move around frequencies, and that would move around the different plates and the different mediums. Sometimes it was projected if it was a big enough room and a big enough crowd, or sometimes I would play in the center of the room and invite people like I did with you guys to gather around. You got some hints of it. I think it's still there in these types of demos, even in an academic setting. There's still that kind of performative element. I think I can't help it. I'm just a little bit used to it. I don't really perform music as much these days, so I focus more on demos, presentations, workshops is a very new angle, especially for Cymatics for me, and that's opened up a new world, and it's quite interesting territory. So the workshops has been the most recent addition. I don't do them frequently, but I do them sometimes. And what's interesting with the workshop is that I give people a transducer and a plate or something, and off you go. And the idea is enough of watching me do it. You know, I want to see people do their own cymatics patterns, and lo and behold, there really isn't much of a sort of secret or trickery to it. If you're handed a transducer, you can do cymatics. I've kind of just got the knack as far as tweaking knobs so that, you know, I can maximize the amount of patterns and hopefully try and not have plates flying across the room. But yes, anyone can do cymatics.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay. In the front here.
Hi again. Yeah, so it was interesting watching the gradual aspects of the soul, and it kind of reminded me of ants. I guess these things have been experimented on ants or things which could be sort of like monitored by the sound. Well, that's quite, you know, potentially. But it's kind of like going back to the basics. So when you've seen the image of the atom, which they've recently managed to get down to a really interesting point, and you can see like it has a kind of vibration. But going back on the macro scale, the sun has a frequency, and how do you think that plays a part in terms of kind of like the universal or kind of like solar system constant?
I'd be very interested to see these newer images of atoms and atomic scale, because as far as my supposition is, and this goes back to an age-old Hermetic principle: as above, so below; as below, so above. For me, you would find a correspondence in how they behave, namely in the formation of their pattern. And I am utterly convinced that you will find a toroidal formation at the heart of both an atom and a sun. The sun, that much is studied, and I think the atom too. I found out recently a lot of in science waveform phenomena and the wave-like behavior of particles is now well known and established, and very much attributed to James Clerk Maxwell. And I found out recently that he saw things in toroidal formations. He was fascinated by vortex physics, and he was convinced that everything formed around these central vortices and behaved that way. Then I only dabble in science. I'm not particularly. It's not my domain. I'm not bound or bothered by empirical demonstrations. So I happily belong to a world where we can speculate much more freely, and for me, the torus would be the answer to your question. For me, that is the pattern, the flow that bridges the perceived gap between the microscopic and the macroscopic.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you for the amazing lecture. It was like super fun, and so I have done like similar work before that I connect the thread towards the speaker and using the vibration to show the sound work, which back then I didn't realize that's the Cymatics, and thank you for letting me know that's what it is. And I just want to ask that for like, while you're using the Cymatics plane, like, can it actually show in like a specific pattern? For example, like alphabetic letters or something like that? Because while I was creating my work, I was trying to use this visual effect to show it to the hard-hearing community. So I just wonder if that could be like a possible effect.
Yeah, in theory certainly, and I think there's a few layers to the question and potential answer, and do feel free to chime in if I'm answering correctly or not. There's a really interesting, I'm going to say it's a theory because I haven't actually, I never managed to conclusively do it myself. Hebrew is considered one of these very old languages, and in Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, they sort of frantically try to tear apart linguistics and letters and the shapes of letters, and usually they try and ascribe it to something deeper and deeper and deeper, all the way to calling it a language of light, which is what we described earlier, a language that's resonance is somehow inherent rather than arbitrarily decided by human beings. There is a myth, and it concerns cymatics, that if you were to intonate the Hebrew alphabet or Hebrew letters, you would actually get the letter forming through cymatics. There's an apparatus called a cymoscope. It's same principle as a Chladni plate. It's even more lo-fi. It's acoustic. The simpler ones is you take a sort of pipe-like structure and you stretch a membrane. So you can stretch a balloon, for example, nice and tight around it, and you can talk through one end and it will vibrate the membrane. You can pour some salt onto there, and you've essentially got yourself a very lo-fi acoustic Chladni plate. The idea was that you could use in theory you could do it with a microphone and a natural Chladni plate, but the idea was that you could use a cymoscope to test this theory about Hebrew alphabets. And I say Hebrew alphabet, but I think it would, at least in theory, work just as well with Sanskrit, for example, and potentially even other alphabets and other languages. I love the idea. I never quite conclusively got to sort of have a letter form in front of me by saying the letter. I would. It doesn't mean that I don't think there isn't some substance to the idea and perhaps some validity. I haven't managed to execute it or to accomplish it with the equipment that I use. This stuff is really sensitive to pitch more than intonation of letters, but maybe will have to be my answer. As far as replicating patterns, yes, I mean this particular plate will always behave the same way. So this particular plate, subject to a frequency, if it gives me a certain pattern and I go and do it 3 days later in a completely different environment, same frequency, same pattern. And some patterns are predictable, some patterns could be considered functional. There's sometimes a joke I make because you do actually get it, especially on some plates. Some will actually give you a straight line, so it's a sort of party trick. I think that kind of answers your question.
Yes. So, sorry. So is the equipment that you use could also make a different impact?
Yes, absolutely. You take a Chladni plate, if I take a different, I said this plate in particular will reproduce the same patterns with the same frequencies no matter what. If I take a different plate, however, and put it on the transducer, the same frequency will give a different pattern because it's subject to the actual plate. So all of the different, there's quite a lot of different variables that will participate in creating those individual patterns. If you actually wanted to cymatically see the shape of a particular frequency, let's just say 33 hertz, for example, you would, as far as I know, you would need to use digital processors. Everything else is showing me what 33 hertz looks like on this particular tray or on this particular plate with salt on it, etc., etc. So I'm not actually seeing what 33 hertz intrinsically looks like. But there are digital processes that can actually translate cymatically frequencies to their actual shape of waveform.
Okay, thank you so much.
Any more questions? Is there any in the chat? Oh, I think there's one in the chat actually. From Thomas. Forgive me if this question has already been asked, but I wondered if you had experimented with different kinds of water. Does fresh spring water from a high mineral content form different patterns or responses to a harder or heavily polluted water?
I love it. I mean, yeah, we did answer variations on that, and I think I said, you know, for me, conclusively, unless you're really measuring things in a much more meticulous way than the naked eye, potentially. With the naked eye, I think you need to go to a considerable difference in viscosity or density to actually see a difference in result. More recently, and gives me another opportunity to speak alchemically. If you go back to the alchemical principles, water would be a type of mercury as a principle. I had the opportunity to do some cymatics with mercury, the other type of mercury, quicksilver, the metallic mercury. So it's a controlled substance now. It's considered toxic. So you have to be a little bit careful, but it behaves. It has very different properties to anything else. It's both a metal and a liquid, which is quite rare, and that was very interesting. That really could benefit from being a cymatic medium in of itself, because it has really its own behavior, and obviously not necessarily something I would bust out for public demos. Quite difficult to capture, and when I say really is something about, that's why I generally prefer inviting people to come and really see it up close and personal with the naked eye. Mercury looks amazing when you cymatize it, if I'm going to use that invented word, to the naked eye, but it's so shape-shifty, it's so fluid, that it's quite difficult to film. In the end, there are some examples up on YouTube, and the only way I could try and convey what I was seeing was to run it at sort of 25% of the speed. But at the naked eye, 100 at normal speed, it looked fascinating, and platonic solids and all that jazz.
Thank you, says Thomas in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions?
Hey, I guess I just had a quick one that might have a very quick answer, but I guess sort of like, how did you arrive at this combination of things? Because I guess it's quite like each one is kind of its own practice in a way, and I'm wondering if it sort of was like the kind of sonic interest first, which led to more kind of alchemical kind of study or research, or like that was really what drove like trying to create these things?
Yes, thank you. I think that's a great question. For me, the underlying drive, impetus and motivation carries throughout all of my different work, whether it is my interest in Hermetic philosophy or my other mystical practices like whirling dervish dancing and cymatics, etc. For me, they all share the same thing in common, which is this innate desire to try and understand how things work, and try and get a peek, a glimmer at the world behind the scenes, and in Hermeticism, and you could almost say it synonymously with mysticism, that's what Hermes represented. He was the messenger god, so he moves freely between worlds, the worlds of the living and the deceased, the front of stage and behind the scenes, the above and the below. When I was growing up, I couldn't abide to the way the world was presented to me, which was the sort of traditional, I would say now traditional, contemporary on the sort of on the scale of humanity and human thinking. The materialist ideology, which is just, well, everything is just a bit fluke, where a random amalgamation of cells that happens to be conscious thanks to this sponge bag in our brain, and the world is fundamentally, we're fundamentally alien to the outside world, and we have to just sort of fend, and it's all a bit one big lottery of trying to accumulate things to what, I'm not entirely sure. I couldn't get behind that when I was growing up, and to the extent that it was problematic. It was a very sort of depressed childhood, but I started noticing other phenomena at work. I started noticing that there were patterns. I started noticing that the inside seemed to have an effect on the outside, and it seemed to be repetitive, and that was very motivating to me, and it led to discovering the work of Carl Jung, who had found out similar things but was backed by academia. He called them synchronicities, for example, and it led to, from there, down a rabbit hole that would lead to Hermeticism, but there's all sorts of other mystical and spiritual and scientific traditions. For me, Cymatics really fell in that category, and my first taste of it was really just seeing a Chladni plate demonstration on YouTube back in the day, and the minute I saw it, I knew I had to do that. I knew I had to build one. I knew I had to build my own. I then had a similar, and this is more recent, epiphany, if you will, when I saw an animated form of a torus. I knew I could connect that to cymatics, and I knew I could demonstrate and reveal toruses. And but I also do it outside of cymatics just by drawing with a compass. And toruses are so they're so prominent and prevalent that it really doesn't take much to draw a basic torus, and kids could stumble on it. But I think that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 8 minutes left. Does anyone else have questions? Yeah, great.
Yeah, my question was to do with sound art. Just do you consider your practice to be sound art? Would you call yourself a sound artist?
Yes, I would. There's always that that sort of awkward moment when someone asks you, you know, at a random event or something. So what do you do? And actually, sound artist is a little bit my go-to as an answer. First of all, I think it does fit. I do technically consider myself to be a sound artist, and it's a bit more specific than saying an artist, which can be a bit misleading because I don't do painting, for example, or the sort of fine arts. I guess if you're at a barbecue and someone says, "What do you do?" and you know, saying I'm a mystic is a bit pompous, though I think that could also fit. I don't make a living off of being a sound artist or being an artist. I make my income elsewhere. I'm quite clever about how I make my money, so I make money without having to spend too much time making it. I own a small business renting empty space in Hackney. So it's a nice situation. I have a lot of time and energy to spend towards this type of investigation, but so to answer your question, yes, it does fit the bill. But technically, my work, being a mystic, probably would be a more accurate answer. I mean, I do guided tours of London. I'm a whirling dancer performer. I actually write books and essays on Hermeticism. So there's a whole scope of things of which sound art is part of, but it doesn't necessarily fit within the sound art banner. But I tend to say sound artist instead of saying mystic.
That's it, thanks.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hiya. I was wondering if you believe in a supernatural element to the experiments that you do. And the second thing was about magic with a K. And could you explain what that is and how it works, or if there's any evidence for it being a thing that is real?
Yes, thank you. Great questions. I particularly like the first question. Is there a supernatural element participating in what I'm doing? I mean, it would almost beg to define an entire sort of framework and context in order to be able to answer the question, but I'm going to go with one direction so it doesn't drag on forever. In alchemy, and this is now being corroborated by science, in alchemy, alchemy is considered, it's called the great art. So it's not the great method, it's not the great science, and it's called the great art because it's closer to an artistry. Even though balancing, measuring is very important, there is something about the role of the experimenter, the role of the alchemist in the operation, that cannot just be replicated 2 times in a row, or by following specific techniques and measurements. Later on, or more recently in quantum physics, we found out that the experimenter has an integral role in the experiment, to the extent that it almost invalidates empirical method and empirical science. But that becomes a little bit inconvenient because we're not quite ready to reinvent the entire process and republish all of the books. So I could go with that angle, though I'm not sure that's suggesting something supernatural, but certainly to everything in life, the experimental and the disposition that we're in is going to have an effect on the experiment. Then in my world, and this is everyone is welcome to make their own version up. In mysticism, each individual is the entire universe. It's an absolutely exquisite, magnificent, and astounding juxtaposition and choreography by which omnipotence, the entire universe, manages to create blind spots in order to interact with itself through its separate parts and constituents. But basically, there's no real fundamental separation between you and me, and we are both the entire shebang. So that's another way of answering your question. For me, there is always what you might call a supernatural force at work. There's the entire universe functioning through me. I'm just the end of the filtration system, or the end of the funnel. I'm glad we went quite mystical for the very last minutes. And the question on magic with a K again would need to have a certain amount of context and framework predefined in order to answer the question, because different people are going to have different relationships to that word and what it means to them. It's a weird one. For having used that word quite a lot for a while, I sort of went off of it, and I don't use that word so much anymore. I do have friends who are very much steeped in that world, and they consider themselves ritual magicians, for example. I'm not going to speak on the behalf of the ritual magicians of the world, or the or even the historical figures, the Crowleys, the John Dee. I'm going to give you my own. I'm going to give you my own definition of what it means to me. For me today, for me, the magic is what I was explaining earlier, but it allows me to explain it with a different vocabulary and a different context. For me, magic, and the keys to the kingdom as far as magic is that which is within is like that which is without, and that which is without is like that which is within. Your inner states not only affect, but are absolutely intimately linked to your outside experience. And if you want to sway the outcome, because that's what, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are talking about when you're referring to magic, especially with a K. For me, it's generally the kind of hidden thing is how to sway the outcome. If you want to sway the outcome, for me, by and large, it's done internally, not externally, and that for me would be my personal definition of magic. And how do you do that? Change your vibe. Change your vibe, and you will find that your external circumstances, your personal external circumstances, your experience of life will magically readjust accordingly. It just so happens that we are predominantly, most of our insight is subconscious, so it's unknown to us, and that's what's generating the swaying the outcome and generating the experiences. So it's not as easy as saying, well, I said I wanted money and I didn't get a whole bunch of money. But if you can manage to get the entirety of your being on board with that vibe, with that request, then for me that force is irresistible.
Okay, thank you, Mark.